The Health Fix podcast teaches you how to take charge of your health naturally by giving you the information you need to elevate your health.
Health Junkies, on today's podcast, I'm interviewing Krista Bigler. She's an expert in eczema. She's a nutritionist and she has personal experience with eczema. So we're going to hear all about her story. But even more important than that, we're going to talk about the underlying causes of eczema and what you can do right now to get control of your skin. So let's jump into the podcast. Hello there, Health Junkies. Welcome to another episode of The Health Fix. I'm your host, Dr. Janine Krause. Today's episode, I have Krista Bigler on. She's an award-winning dietitian, nutritionist, online educator, host of the Less Stressed Life podcast. She specializes in helping others increase their performance and up-level their happiness by addressing gut health issues. Ooh, that's a big one. We're going to talk about that today. Inflammation, including digestive issues such as gas, bloating, all those fun things that they say really fast in the commercials. And she's got brain fog stuff she's helping with, fatigue, joint or muscle pain, migraines, autoimmune conditions, and food sensitivities, all in her private practice. She's the creator of the Less Stressed approach to eczema and Fast Track to Fabulous programs. And my most favorite part about Krista is that she rides a unicycle along with her family. She skis like me. She rides dirt bikes. That's so cool. And like me, she loves higher elevations, AKA the mountains, and can get lost in them. So Krista, thank you for coming on and chatting with me on The Health Fix.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk all about eczema today.
Eczema, gut, all of it, how it's connected. Mm-hmm. Since I think part of my practice, I spend, at least 10, 15 minutes communicating about that connection between gut and the skin and all of those things. So I'm excited to kind of break it all down for folks today. Now, of course, what would it be without a good story to set things off? And you have a personal history with eczema. And I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about the background, how the skin stuff came about, and how you decided to become a dietitian nutritionist.
Sure thing. Well, I'll start with the eczema story. And this wasn't really all that long ago, maybe 5-6 years ago. I was kind of moving from conventional practice I was working in a dialysis unit. I was working on starting a private practice. And so I think when you're going through transitions in life, there's a little more stress that happens. And so anyway, and I also with skin stuff, you are a little bit genetically programmed. So I remember having skin stuff at least in high school, because I remember being on those typical drugs for it, just very intermittently, Elidel, steroids. And I just thought it was like a thing, a thing that my sisters had, that I had, that just came in the winter and went away, right? Like I had dry skin in the winter and I never really thought much of it. Because self-awareness is your best friend. Self-awareness is really like the one thing that's going to accelerate you from healing or not, pretty much. So at that time I thought, oh, this is just what you do. And that's how we address skin stuff. And that's why it's probably it's one of the more annoying things to address, because we want it to be very simple. And it's more annoying than I'd rather address ulcerative colitis than eczema sometimes, because it can be really annoying. It's just an outward signal. And often we don't do anything about our internal stuff or our little whispers, but when our skin starts to flare, then we do something. So fast forward, I had to just intermittently treat it with different things. And a quick story, because steroids kind of thin your skin. I did not use them for very long, but for years I would burn and I don't use essential oils, like as a daily practice, but when I would get ill in my adult life, I would use like eucalyptus oil or some kind of like chest rub, right? Mm-hmm. And even though I should know that you put it in another oil, I would burn myself, and everyone can burn themselves, but like even if it was diluted a little bit, I would burn myself in the area that I had used steroids very short term in high school. So it was like a nasty reminder, like it's funny how you have to learn the same lessons over and over and over sometimes, right? Like I learned that lesson at least 3 years in a row. So I had burned skin for a couple of weeks. So anyway, I was dealing with, this just up and down ebb and flow until the real pivoting point of the story where it got ugly was one summer I took my kids to swimming lessons. There was a new pool I live in the middle of nowhere, so 45 miles away. I took them to the swimming lessons. I was at the swimming pool every day. And I knew there was something about chlorine that was a little bit there are some like side note things about how this presented in my life and was kind of a problem. But long story short, after 5 to 6 days straight at the swimming pool, I broke out in a crazy vengeful rash. And that was not my typical, because normally in the winter, I'd have like this I presented as a dry, and I have lots of feelings about how eczema presents. It's not just eczema. It's like, yes, we have our at least 10 different types like medically, but also just the way it's looking or how it acts tells you a ton about what is going on under the surface. And so I kind of feel like they have behaviors or lifestyles of their own. So anyway, the fact that it was even in the summertime was just nuts for me. So it was usually winter, and it had shown up in the summer after these many days at the pool. I broke out in this horrible thing, and it was so handy because it was not in a very hidden place. It was all over my eye, which I know as the Chinese medicine person, you probably have feelings about, because I have strong feelings about eczema that shows up around the eyes. It was all over my neck, and then some other places, but this was the major part, right? And I don't even have a lot of pictures from that time, because when you have pictures, when you have a time where you don't like the way you look, you don't keep those things, right? You try to bury that part. And so it was kind of ugly. And unfortunately, the most obnoxious thing was that we have a really standard toolbox for skin stuff. And I can always tell if someone went somewhere and got a really standard toolbox, a multi and a mega, whatever, for eczema. But I was having a really hard time. I was going to all types of different practitioners, looking for help. And I was not, unfortunately, I was just not, we were not turning up amazing answers. And it was a pretty slow, steady journey because of that, right? Like I couldn't find someone to help me accelerate through that. But what I learned through the process was that it was 100% gut mediated. It was 100% also liver mediated. You learn through your genetics that, I just kind of already had the situation where this can happen. So even after correcting that big, ugly mess that was, I can still create a situation of eczema in my life if I'm not careful, because I'm genetically, I have the equipment to get it done. So if the right environment takes place, then it can happen, right? So if I would get a sinus infection a couple months later, I can get a little bit of skin irritation. So I just have to stay on top of things. Like it's really about recognizing those stupid little whispers before they come screams, right? Mm-hmm. I mean that in a really positive way. So eczema is annoying, but at the same time, it's kind of nice because it's giving you a literal outward alarm signal that there's something going on. And so the fact that someone's listening to this podcast is really helpful. They're probably they're different than the regular population, but you said that you spend a while relating the gut and the skin together. And that is a challenge, right? It's almost easier if someone has a skin issue and then has some gut symptoms to tie those together instead of being told. It's kind of like fertility and gut or whatever, like any seemingly unrelated thing, right? It's almost easier if you have some kind of gut symptom to help drive that point home.
Oh, so. Absolutely. Yeah. I think a lot of people who come in, with skin issues are like, well, no, I don't have any gut issues. We dive a little deeper and then we find, maybe there is something. But I think the point that you made that I want to kind of highlight is the component of you have to keep working at it. There's not this kind of component of you get rid of it and you're done and life goes on and you can go back to doing whatever you want. There are some implications, because I found that over and over again that with eczema, it's a lifelong journey of paying attention to the whispers.
Right. But and at the same time, because I sometimes feel different, I have some colleagues that will say, I have eczema and it just, when I go to this climate, it flares. I would like to say, like, I have survived. I don't know how I want to say it. Really, like, I don't feel like we have to have eczema if we understand what's going on. Like if we understand it really well, and and again, it takes a while to learn that, like you just said, so if you learn that going to a certain climate exacerbates it, is there something you can do about that to try to prevent it, right? I mean, what does that tell you about the underlying situation that helps you figure out what to do? So it's kind of obnoxious, right? Because there's so many different potential root causes here. But I mean, really, if we break it down really simply, we think about, I like to always oversimplify things. So I always use a triad to oversimplify things. And in the skin, we need to go about it externally and internally and some kind of wild card, right? Like, so when people are saying, I feel like I've done everything, because people will say all the time, oh, I feel like I've done everything for eczema. And they'll tell me a lot of topical things. And I'm like, cool. So you've been working on the exterior skin barrier. Let's see if we can accelerate that healing process. Because if that's broken, you're going to let stuff get in and cause more. Like if it's broken on the outside, you're SOL. Like you're just kind of screwed until that gets I mean, you can do internal work, but if you're continually abusing it, so example, pandemic time, we're having what we could almost call an epidemic of hand eczema right now, right? Really, right? And why? Because we naturally have this thin, oily layer on our skin, and it works as like a shield or an antimicrobial layer to help keep the skin microbiome in homeostasis or just kind of normal. And if we overwash with soaps, we will strip our body of that natural oily layer, which is why, especially in the wintertime, it's so important to wash the pits, as they say, and maybe not over soap the whole body, because we're allowing this whole thing to kind of take hold. We conventionally think about eczema being a topical Staphylococcus aureus or a certain kind of bacteria overgrowth on the skin. But once we irritate that oily layer, allow that to kind of overgrow in that area, and then let's say we start itching a certain area, it gets under our fingernail. We now have staph aureus under our fingernails. We move around our body because our skin is maybe just dry. I think dry is a loose word too. Dry skin versus eczema, maybe. We can talk about what to do for that. But when you scratch on one spot that actually has staph overgrowth and you move it to another spot, then you're translocating the bacteria and you're spreading it, so to speak. But anyway, at the beginning, it's like, hey, you got to put a protective barrier on that topical layer, because if you don't, it just is going to get broken open. It's going to crack. We're going to let things in that don't belong there. And I feel like it was a dermatologist that coined this term. I haven't been able, I see it in some papers, and he does co-author some papers, but they call this leaky skin. So we are familiar with gut intestinal permeability for, more than a decade now. If you search PubMed, the research repository, thousands of articles will come back. So we're getting on the same page around that. Cool, whatever. But, they're talking about this leaky skin because everything's, we're just talking about a barrier or a membrane, and the skin is like your external gut or you're the membrane to the outside world. So anyway, so it's kind of cool. You have to think about the external, and then you grow your skin from the inside, right? And then there's like whatever that wild card is, because I would say, since we're talking about hand eczema, aside from like really irritating the topical skin barrier, I don't know if you want to talk about like how eczema seems to progress over the years, but it usually starts as one thing, it layers up. And then finally, what I'll see all the time is they'll say, I had eczema as a kid, and then it went away, and then I had this. And then like as an adult, this came full circle and came back, but I never had hand eczema until I was adult. And so I would say, and you will not find this in research or a book, but clinically, and as I talk with colleagues and mentors, I would say 9 out of 10 times hand eczema has a huge stress component, which is annoying. And we could talk about the nutrients related to that.
Yeah, two things. One, I'm thinking people and myself, of course, want to know, like, all right, what's your go-to for protecting the skin barrier? What do you like?
Yeah, let's start with the hands.
Yeah.
First of all, I require like whatever we can do to reduce the frequency of washing. For example, I had this client and she was a speech therapist with kids. So she was able to rearrange her schedule a little bit more. So she didn't have to wash so much, because it was just, everything was spread out to where she was irritating it so much. You can maybe change the soap that you're using at your work. So like you can basically boil it down to every single thing that touches your skin. And I think hands are such an easy target because we wash those more than anything else. So we want to change up what we're using already. And as far as sanitizers, if we cannot do an alcohol-based, right? Because that's really abrasive. So that's a huge microbiome disruptor because it's just going to kill everything. Mm-hmm. I'm going to allow bad stuff to overgrow. And then from there, once we work on the inputs, then what are we going to put on top of it to protect it? I like to use barrier creams, whatever is thick and provides like almost a lipophobic layer more so. So like almost like the water would run off. I also had people who work in schools that wear gloves throughout the day just to like, again, reduce the washing. But there is a product, and I'm not saying like it's some magic thing, but sometimes I do, anyway, I'll talk about soaks and things in a minute, but I will do like gloves in a bottle is sometimes nice. And again, we'll use lanolin creams, and some people would say, oh, that doesn't work. But we use literally like udder cream. If you think about it, like for cows, or women, they use lanolin on the nipple, and it's, it repels that water, allows the skin underneath to heal. Very similar situation on the skin. So I'm doing everything I can to accelerate that healing. Now there's nutrients you can put into your oil. I'm pretty basic on what you put on topically, because sometimes what is a normal behavior is for you to open the closet and be frustrated and like just change things constantly. And so I'm kind of a fan of like, you try to use the same thing for at least a week or two, and then change it, because sometimes people are having issues with a certain product. And because they're using so many different things out of desperation, they actually can't tell, one, what's working, and two, what might be irritating for them. Because there's a lot of like, once we get into that whole, of course, eczema is part of the atopic march, which is eczema, allergies, and asthma. So there is potential for allergy type stuff to be going on as well. And so we just want to be careful with what we're putting on topically, because a lot of creams do have a lot of stuff in them. And so I just kind of break it down to like maybe a simple oil. That's usually what I will do. And then sometimes I mix in some nutrients. I mean, zinc can be a good builder, like topic. I will definitely use that kind of stuff topically, just to try to accelerate that healing. And then like so we talked a little bit about washing, but like if you have a whole body or hands or whatever, you can do different. And those you can absorb topical nutrients that way, right? With like salts and things. And those can be very effective. In fact, there's a whole article that talks about the efficacy of different things. They used oatmeal and rice and salt and whatever. And Dead Sea salts were really one of the most effective things. And I think it's because they're so darn mineral rich, and people have such an issue with mineral issues, and topical absorption is actually quite effective. So, and this goes back to like just the whole, if you think about every cell, like every cell makes up tissue, which makes up skin. And we struggle with getting fat soluble nutrients and minerals inside cells. And if we improve getting minerals inside cells, which is what Dead Sea salts are rich in minerals, if we improve how we get that in the cell, your body it needs those nutrients, right? And it's very inefficient to take it orally. It's not getting in the cell super well. So we need this beautiful, like little fatty layer in the cell to get that stuff in. So anyway, a topical absorption of nutrients is actually kind of cool. And it's relaxing. It's like multifunctional.
Yes. Because that really leads me into the next thing I wanted to talk about anyways, the stress component there too. But yes, I mean, having your salt bath and just chilling a little bit, 2 for 1. Who
right.
is going to argue that? Now, granted, if you have kiddos, that could be interesting, but you can get all kinds of toys for the bathtub. And I think it could end up being quite fun for everyone in the end.
And depending on their age, you can just, you can call it, like I've had multiple people say, we just treat it like a little spa time, like, hey, let's just take, like kids go for that too, especially if you're modeling that, they'll go all over for it. They're total. I've done that with my own kids. Sometimes I'm like, I am going crazy with you guys right now. So why don't we just take a nice bath before bed and calm everything down, get a little magnesium in, and they will go, and it can be a great thing.
Nice. Oh man. Yes. I wonder if I could figure that out for my dog. That's a whole nother podcast.
That is such a curiosity, right? Animal nutrition stuff. Like, I don't know. I don't know if a dog would find that relaxing.
Might not find it too much.
I'm imagining this too much right now.
Dogs do have skin issues. So I think about it that way too, because my dog definitely was having some issues this year. So it just makes me think about, other things to add on. So stress is a huge factor. We know that it's kind of one of the major things that's going to impede healing. But a lot of people will tell me, I'm not stressed, doc. I have no idea why I keep getting eczema over and over again. So let's talk a little bit about stress and maybe transition into some of the other factors that we might not be thinking about that could be contributing to the eczema.
Yeah, stress is so hard. I am not interested in stress from there are all kinds of people you can put on your team to help you with stress. I am interested in the physiological effects that stress is creating in your body. When cortisol, or I always call this our darling stress hormone, which is secreted by our adrenals, our brain, by the way, this is the connection, right? Our brain essentially tells, like, different reactions happen and essentially tells our adrenals what it needs, and the adrenals respond. Our body's always trying to protect us. Always, always, always. But cortisol should go up for 90 minutes so you can go change a tire, and then go down so you can go to bed. But people live with it kind of elevated. And so when cortisol is up, it dumps some key nutrients for sure. It dumps magnesium, which we were just talking about with, that's what I was alluding to when you're absorbing minerals. I mean, salts, mineral salts, you can absorb multiple minerals, but magnesium is sort of the star in that, the star electrolyte, so to speak. And so it calms the nervous system. It's essential for gut health because it has a cofactor of stomach acid. If you don't have stomach acid, it's a gate to allowing crap to come in and set up residence there that shouldn't be there. It dumps B5, pantothenic acid, also nicknamed the stress or gray hair vitamin. So the reduction of B5 alone can sometimes be tied quite often to hand eczema for one. So that's, those are some of those connections that we see with stress. Now, talking about stress and awareness. Now, this is really obnoxious because I think I've really gotten into personality, like leaning into your personality type for your best self. And so right now I'm really interested. I'm really speaking the language of Enneagram, which is a 9-point personality typing. And so when you read about it, it's not just like, oh, I'm this number, so I mean this. It's like, I really like to dig into what does it look like when that particular personality type. So mine is a 3. I'm an achiever, or I like to accomplish things, or I like to motivate people. And there's all kinds of things, related to this. But if you're a 5 or a 4, it's fun to read about that, understand what that number looks like in a healthy state and a non-healthy state. Because as like in my type, if I get stressed, I just kind of like want to numb out and not do anything. So again, I said this at the beginning, self-awareness is your best and worst enemy. If someone doesn't have any self-awareness, it is unlikely that I can help them very well, because I cannot live with them every day. Right. And point things out to them. So, we use different tools to improve self-awareness. But like that's a huge piece. So unfortunately for some of our personality types, stress is seen as a weakness. And so we're like, I'm not stressed, or our set point is such that it doesn't feel like stress because we've just always been this way. Or I always say like excitement. I had to really understand that excitement, even as I'm preparing for a podcast, I'm so excited and I talk fast, and really my body can read that as stress, which is annoying. Right. And so, and another annoying lesson I've had to learn multiple times is I have to really be careful with my coffee consumption, because that caffeine will raise the cortisol and it'll dump my magnesium and I'll get a twitchy eye. And I'm like, what the heck? What in the world? Like, anyway, so you have to learn lessons again and again. So stress is an important thing, and we need to stop. Like, if you don't have time, I think we need to put it in ways that are tangible and make sense to us. So if you don't have time to take a break and do something for yourself, you're probably living in too much stress, right? If you're waking up and reacting to your day instead of being in charge of it proactively, you're probably under stress, right? If you are kind of grouchy or bitchy to the people that you live with or you love, you might be under a bit of stress. Those are all like super common outward signs that we do not view, right? Unfortunately, we do not view those as stress. So it's very obnoxious, because literally right now, one of my projects is kind of a resilience or an adrenal reset thing. And the marketing is a nightmare for it. Like, I don't know if it'll work, because people it's so cool, because what you should do before you're really stressed is support it. You should just give your adrenal some support. Examples. I am going on vacation today, and fortunately I spent all day packing yesterday. Otherwise I'd be kind of stressed today, because for some reason when you're packing a family of 5 people, it can be kind of stressful. And another stressor I feel like every year is around the holidays, when I'm wrapping gifts last minute. The mom gets to do everything. And those are times I take a cue, like I need to stop, recognize this kind of sucks, but it is short term. It's going to end. And I use some support. It doesn't mean I always get to stop and take a bath. It means like maybe I'm taking some other stuff to just bring that cortisol down, because I need to recognize it. So I hope I'm not off on too much of a tangent. This is a real interest point of mine, but it's probably interesting because it's an intellectual topic you can kind of just mull over, because the way we read it and perceive it and talk about it varies so much from person to person. So anyway, hope that's helpful.
No, absolutely. It's true. Stress. I think just hearing like the snapping at people kind of thing, we kind of know that, that might be stress, but we're also going to blame it on hormones and things of that nature too. So it's good to hear that. And I think it, kind of ties into sleep too, where if we're not sleeping, our body's not going to recover from the day. And so of course we're going to have issues with skin. We're going to have issues with our body just struggling to put things together, really. And you've tied in the connection between sleep and eczema I would love to hear how you go about recommending to your clients and, how to work on their sleep to work with eczema specifically. Is there any
this is
magical pearls that help with that?
This is a double-edged sword, because we know that the nighttime itching makes you lose sleep and you need the sleep to heal. So the first rule is do whatever we can to sleep. So if we have to take melatonin or take sleep aids or whatever to get sleep initially, then that would be better than not sleeping, right? We want to address the root cause, but that's not usually going to happen yesterday. So we have to do what we can to sleep. And unfortunately, sleep issues are a massive issue too out in the world, right?
Yeah.
Beyond just eczema. So I like to look at probably like you do. What time are you awake? What's the issue? Are you having trouble falling asleep? If you're having trouble falling asleep, let's address sleep hygiene issues, because that's sometimes an issue. We're wired and tired. We're letting our cortisol go up too high before bed. So there's a lot of and especially with teens, I think looking at sleep hygiene is the biggest thing to look at first, sleep hygiene. But if we have good sleep hygiene, right, we are shutting down, clearing our brain, watching some people whose adrenals are shot. I feel like they really struggle with the blue light thing, right? With screens at night. So I have little hacks, right? I turn my screen. I turn my screen's red half the time, because if you are looking at it in the morning, it's messing up. So my sleep hygiene stuff you can do. So that's extra. But if you're having trouble falling asleep and it's really not related to sleep height, it's not a problem you've accidentally created for yourself because you're up late working all the time or whatever. If you're having trouble falling asleep, I usually think that serotonin, which is, at least 70% made in the gut, which is a precursor to melatonin, is usually at play. So as we correct gut stuff, which you can start to correct gut stuff, I am anti over eliminating foods long-term. And I think it's good for me to say that out loud, because a lot of times, especially if you know that I'm a dietitian nutritionist, you might say, oh, she probably treats eczema with food. That's fine and dandy, but I will also get all the people that have restricted, and that's not an option really long-term. There's a reason you're having issues with food, and it's probably related to your gut. So anyway, so we want to correct gut stuff. And I think we can usually see pretty awesome changes on the short end of a month. For sure. There are things, food will sometimes add insult to injury short-term before we've corrected gut stuff. So inflammatory cytokines or messengers will just be upregulated by stress, certain food things, sometimes gut stuff. So if we do, I always say sometimes we'll do things that are sitting on the couch with a broken ankle, right? So I can hyperdose probiotics before bed to simulate a good gut scenario temporarily, because it's not going to stick doing that, but temporarily to increase serotonin production. I have seen that work. Okay. So anyway, we've got to address gut stuff, right? Sorry, no Band-Aid here. You can yes, absolutely use CBD or melatonin or whatever helps you, or magnesium or 5-HTP or whatever to get to sleep, or magnesium bath, kids, right? But we got to stop the itching as much as possible. So this might be a good time if we're trying to watch our steroid use. There's no shame in using steroid use, because if you need to sleep, for that, because the sleep is the priority. Right. So whatever we can do to get sleep first while we address the root cause. If we're having trouble falling asleep, it's a little different than if we're waking up between 12 and 3, 5 and 6, right? Later in the morning, sometimes it's cortisol stuff. Middle of the night stuff is often liver-ish or gut stuff, because I think that has a connection, right? What's going on in the, everything that's imbalanced in the gut needs to consume things and give off waste. And where do you think that waste goes? We need to process that too. So it kind of dumps into the elimination systems. And so anyway, depending on what time we wake up is just maybe there's an activity going on for sure. So there's a lot of reading between the lines, I feel with sleep. And I don't think this sounds crazy probably to your audience. Hopefully it doesn't. And hopefully it's really helpful for them. So that's what I'm always looking at is how are you falling? What time are you waking up? Are you stuck awake? Is there some other specific piece? But that's kind of how I approach sleep. It's let's get you sleeping and then let's fix the root cause of it real quick.
Yeah. So. Yeah. No, it's super huge because if you're not sleeping, you're not going to get any better. And that's one of the things that I see with a lot of patients over and over again. And I love that you mentioned, I saw it in your media kit about getting out of food jail, because I'm a huge fan of not having people on restrictive diets for too long, because really, as a naturopath, I created a lovely food issue, an eating disorder with myself from basically restricting for so many things, because I self-proclaimed I have the worst gut in the world. And so really I was taking all these things out, but wasn't addressing what are my gut bugs? How do I do this? So for folks who are going, okay, yeah, I tried taking out gluten, I tried taking out dairy, and I got no change. What do you have them doing to assess what's going on in the gut? Do you guys, work with, like you had said, some extra probiotics, or are you doing gut microbiome testing? What's the plan? What do you do?
Well, let me take back the curtain back in the day, because maybe it is useful for people to know that what we've arrived, how your practitioner practices right now is maybe not how they, you're always going to, no matter who you work with, or if you're working on yourself, everyone's growing. I think that's important to mention. So once upon a time, the beginning of my practice, I was having a lot of fun with doing some targeted food changes and seeing great results. And then that just didn't work anymore. Mm-hmm. Right. So that was fun. And actually we're kind of seeing that we have to be careful in natural medicine in general, is food is great. When we change our diet, we can affect our microbiome within 24 to 36 hours, but that doesn't mean over restriction forever. And so what basically happened next was I had to figure out the next step. And so that's when I got really into gut microbiome stuff. And so I use stool testing, and I think it's I think it can be a very nice objective measurement. And I think people really like to see, I was actually having a text conversation with some friends earlier today about a study and blah, 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 and whatever, who it was funded by. And evidence-based medicine is this. It is what's in the research. It is what is clinical experience. So what do we know, right? From seeing people and addressing things with people. And it's also client preferences, or what are the client's experiences and what do they believe? It's the intersection of that. And so often we rely too much on testing. I mean, that is a potential. So some people are out here doing no testing, not sure, read some blogs, eliminated all nightshades, no change. And then we've got people that are doing a lot of testing and throwing Band-Aids on it. Oh, I see there's a vitamin D deficiency, or a B12 deficiency, or whatever. So we're going to give these, that's fine, but there's some root causes there. So they do a lot of testing and then still don't get a benefit. And then there is what the test says, and then being able to balance that with what's going on with what the client's experiencing. So I use stool testing, but I'm at the point in practice where it's a tool. It's really nice to help people feel validated. Sometimes they're yep, this and this and this and this, will 100% create this situation. And that's great. That's really straightforward and hopefully quick to resolve. And then sometimes it doesn't show everything either, because no test is perfect. No test is perfect. So you need to have someone or try to find someone to help you that kind of knows what's going on, right? Because you do want to use your symptoms. I tend to, at the end of the day, all we care about is results, right? Mm-hmm. And feeling good. And so I would say if you can find someone who will lean toward, as long as you feel good, more so than testing, and you're moving in the right direction, more so than what your test says, that kind of trumps. So yes, I am looking at what the gut microbiome is saying. I'm doing some different, I'm remodeling that, I always say, right? I'm using targeted products to change that. And that just came out of not because I wanted to do that, but because if you're going to help people get out of, I always say there's two food categories: food reactions and food digestion problems. But food digestion problems create food reactions for a lot of people, right? Mm-hmm. We could go into each of those. But so yeah, I use that. Sometimes I look at nutrient stuff. I tend to err on the side of being a good steward of finances and not over testing if possible, because I find that people appreciate that, right? But yes, I do use those tests. And sometimes we still do use food testing, because the short term is that it helps them, again, sit on the couch in the appropriate way with that broken ankle. Even though we're not going to sit on the couch forever with a broken ankle, we're going to go in and fix it. It just gives them some short-term wins. And when you're not sleeping and you're itching and whatever, short-term wins. And it works in certain profiles, right? So bright red. And again, different skin color types don't always appear as red. They appear as darker with eczema. So I think that's important, because even practitioners can't recognize that all the time. That's something I've worked on awareness with, but it'll look more gray, ashen, darker, whatever. But in lighter colored skin, when it's bright and red, I feel like that's always easier. It responds a little bit more to food in the short term. So there's some types that are just like, they're not very connected to, when you have a reaction to a food, there's usually like an error going on in how something is getting broken down, which is related to gut, basically. So anyway, when I say things respond to food, I just mean like, oh, it's because there's this error going on in the gut. Am I making sense?
Yes.
I hope. Okay.
Yes. No, I mean, it all boils down to, how do we end up with food sensitivities in the first place? It's usually some sort of mechanical issue. Either we're eating too fast, we don't have enough enzymes, maybe have slow motility because either we're stressed, there's always something that is going to be the precipitating factor. And then we end up with the food coming across the bloodstream, getting into, the blood. And now we have immune system complex reactions that happen. But really, if you look at things in terms of where they're showing up, and you kind of talked about this at the beginning in terms of Chinese medicine, and you're talking about the presentation. A lot of times I use where the body mapping is showing up to kind of go back to like, okay, this is what's going down. And you had mentioned in some of your notes that the presentation of eczema kind of links you towards the root cause. So say maybe we have some folks who are eczema beginners, right? They're like, I'm now going to stop, I want to stop using so many steroids. I want to figure this out naturally. Maybe they've been offered some of the hardcore biologics and they're like, wait a minute, I want to get a hold of this naturally. Where would you direct them if they were looking at their skin and they were looking at maybe a map of their skin and they're going, okay, where should I focus my efforts if I'm going to start today?
That's a good question. So I kind of made quiz about this because I was doing it in my head all the time with people. I would have a call with them, and in my brain, I would say, this is the priority, right? Is the priority the gut first? Does the liver need support, or is like stress out of control and also needs to be supported before you can even do some of those other, does it have to be an underlying piece? Yeah. So I created this quiz, and I'm going to go over like some high points of it with you, because then you can be inside my brain with me if that's okay. So essentially, if it's presenting like this, so I always say, let me start at like childbirth. If it looks like, I talked about the pros and cons of it being red, but if it's kind of red and bright and pocky or whatever, or even circular, or if it's showing up on the inside of the elbows or behind the knees, I feel like that, or like usually in childhood, it looks up like that. Not always. Sometimes you are unfortunate and you don't get that kind. This is my favorite kind. I call this inflammatory type eczema. It's a big umbrella. What I really mean is like gut mediated. But like there's certain things that are going to work for it. So you can prioritize gut stuff. And then the next one, if it is more dry and patchy, if it gets worse in the winter versus the summer, if it, let's see, I mean, that's a big thing. If it presents, around the eye, whatever, I call that environmental style. And so I prioritize liver stuff first. So like, if people have chemical sensitivities and things, I prioritize that first. And then finally, it's hard to actually trigger the stress result in the quiz, actually, because, usually people have so many of those other couple, like usually you have it compiles, it like layers up. Like you started with inflammatory and gut, and then maybe as you became an adult, it got, the liver and the environment became more of a player. So now it's becoming more complicated. And then finally what happens last is where stress like turns it over the edge, sort of. And so if you continue turning on that stress hose, how successful are you going to be? It's just, it does not work to not address that, because it's part of what's robbing your nutrition. So I have some marker, like it's hand eczema and some other, there's like not that many markers that basically say that pushes it over the edge. And again, it's how we resonate with it. So I always say like, it's hard to trigger that as the result, but you need to understand if like this was a piece of it, this must be addressed properly. And that's the most complicated type, because now you have 3 layers essentially that you're working through. And again, I'm an oversimplifier. I have a friend who uses like 15 root causes, and I just kind of put a lot of those root causes under those 3 umbrellas, right? Is how I do it. So like when we're talking about, and I don't even like to get into this if I can avoid it. Certainly it's a problem, but mold stuff and metal stuff and whatever, like it's not, I'd like to just deal with like the basics first. Because I think sometimes when people are listening when they feel like they have a really challenging case, And they sometimes want to go down that rabbit hole. Like, I must be the most complicated version. Maybe you are, but maybe you're not. And so I always try to lean toward like, could we be, what if this was my favorite quote that I have like a sign hanging up? I think Tim Ferriss said it is like, if this was simple, what would it look like? And I always want to start that way because we tend to get quite overwhelmed with this whole process. Right. So I just like 3 places is really a simple place to start. Kind of like relates back to, and we could relate the stress piece to the adrenals, right? Like at the end of the day, I'm very boring. I'm supporting the gut, the liver, the adrenals. Certainly we can do other things. But those are like the triad that's really affecting what's going on in it. Like the skin is literally just an outward sign. It's a mechanism of elimination our body uses. Unfortunately, it cuts to the heart, right? It cuts to our vanity. And if we're smart, we just understand that that's not quite right. Right. So that's kind of how I look at it or layer it on. I feel like it kind of works, right? Like if you have this, start with that layer. It's really about where you start because people will just like read about something or hear a podcast and they'll go after that thing. It's like, not everyone needs to do everything, right? That's a very important piece. You don't all need to do everything, but if it's kind of piled up and piled up and piled up, like you might have to start at the top and peel back that layer first. And it's all about prioritizing. You said, where do people start? If you understand kind of how your skin behaves and how you got there, it helps you understand where to start.
That makes sense. And I think there's a huge, component and huge value in simplifying things because I think we can go down some really complex rabbit holes and really just end up confused. And as a practitioner, I've went down those rabbit holes and now I'm starting to be like, let's rein it in because if we can miss the simple stuff when we're caught up in the complicated stuff. And I think that's a really good point for a lot of folks trying to sleep out their own health issues.
Yeah. And let me mention, sometimes even I don't really I need to step back and remind people of simple things like hydration and all types of things. But a favorite sneaky one that gets me that I think is something I would have people look at. And it's popped up in multiple clients. And then also with my husband recently, he had bad breath. So I was addressing it from like what Krista would think normally. And it was like only marginally improving. And I said, I think you should go to the dentist and make sure you don't have just something going on, because I've had that happen where people don't really know that they're like, oh, well, my dentist just makes me floss more because he says blah, blah, blah. I'm like, well, that's relevant. Like, like everyone should floss, but like if you have special sensitive gums, you might have some extra stuff going on. And so he went to the dentist recently, and here's where it gets really good. I made him go 2 hours away to this dentist that was supposed to be better. And he came home and he was like, got his teeth cleaned. He said, well, that wasn't really like that much better. And I paid twice as much, but at that dentist, they told him that something was rotting underneath of this crown that he had. So he was poking at it. And so handily enough, right when he got home, the crown fell off. Like that could have happened a few hours sooner. That would have been helpful. So anyway, the crown fell off. And then he was like, he's like asking me, he was all stressed out for like a week trying to decide what to do. If he should go get it pulled. Because I said, you have half of a tooth. You're not that young anymore. Like just get it out, because then if you only have half of it, it's already decaying, like just take it out and do something else. So anyway, called multiple people to try to figure out what to do. So then he goes to the regular dentist kind of closer by, to get it pulled. And he goes to the dentist and the dentist says, there's nothing wrong with your tooth. Like, just get this crown put back on it.
Oh no.
And he's like, well, that doesn't make sense because the other guy was like poking at it and it was like decaying. So that sends him back so this is like a lot of trips. So this sends him back to the other guy who, they decide, let's like grind it off or whatever and put this crown on. And they were able to do a same day thing. And it was all hunky dory and fantastic. It saved him one extra trip. And guess what happened after that? When that decaying disgustingness got fixed, his breath was a lot better. But when people have a tooth infection, like the mouth is really important. It's a very good source to get into your bloodstream and get into your body. And so if you haven't, like kind of how you can take sublingual supplements to bypass digestion, sort of like get straight into the bloodstream, absorb right through the gums. If you're absorbing crap via your gums and they're unhealthy, then this is like a great way you're like throwing cesspools of bacteria into your body, which is hard for your body to handle. And if this bacteria needs to eat and give off waste, it might give off waste that shows up in your skin. Yes. So fun little fact that you should think about that I've had step on my toes more than once. So that's very obnoxious because I'm not a dentist and that's not my job, but I still want you to go to the dentist and make sure. And so I tell you that long story because it's like, well, that's annoying. If you hadn't taken my advice and gone to get his teeth cleaned at like supposedly the better dentist, which neither one of us were convinced it was that much better. But after that experience, we're kind of like, maybe we'll go back there. The other guy thought there was no problem. So there we go.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's important to get, second opinions, but oral health definitely has a total impact on systemic health. And that's, prime example of it. And so, yes, folks, I'm also the same. I started after a while just to ask like any dental issues, and so for those of you guys out there who are listening to this right now and you're wondering if maybe something's going on with your oral cavity that might be affecting your skin, go get it checked out right now.
Yes.
So we've went down all kinds of different aspects talking about eczema, and we kind of got folks knowing what they got to do, simplify and get some help. And in terms of getting help, and perhaps we have some folks that are interested in accessing some of what you have to offer. Can you tell us, Krista, where we can find you, where folks can get more information, and how they can listen to your podcast as well?
Yeah. Really, the podcast is my baby. So the podcast is called The Less Stress Life. March of 2020, I had a book come out around eczema. So then we did like quite a series about it. So totally check that out. I think it's a great series on eczema. And then of course, I always have things thrown in around skin health just because I do a lot of it. And you can find me at either one of my websites, KristaBigler.com or eczemanutritionist.com. And if you go to Eczema Nutritionist, you'll be able to take that quiz to figure out your eczema subtype, if that's of interest to you since Janine brought it up. So
I think that's important because that'll give you guys a step. Because me, I'm big on like do something after you listen to the podcast. I want you to be taking action. And if this is resonating with you and you're confused about your skin, it's time to take the first step, get the quiz. That way you can get some direction and then perhaps chat with Krista and figure out where to go next. So Krista, thank you so much for sharing all kinds of great information and your stories. And the tooth story is a good one. I think that one is key. So thanks to your husband. Hopefully his teeth are doing well now and all is good. But I love hearing the stories because I think that connects folks. So thank you so much for coming on. And I look forward to jumping on your podcast next. Hey, health junkies. I hope you enjoyed my podcast. If you want to continue the conversation based on what topic I'm talking about at any given time on the Health Fix podcast, head over to my Facebook group, Find Your Health Fix. It's where we are talking about what's going on in health, what I'm talking about in the podcast, and I love to answer questions there. So come hang out and join the conversation. And by the way, right now I have a free Manage Your Stress Naturally course that you can grab on my website at drjkrausend.com because so many people are stressed out right now, and really it has to do with the basics, your routines and simple habits that are messing you up. So head on over to drjkrausend.com and go check out my free course on managing stress naturally. All right, folks, have a great day, whatever you're doing.
Subscribe, rate, and share info.